All right, there we go. It looks like we are live. Good morning and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. Today we're talking about a very interesting concept, which is the idea of family business longevity. So if you are in a family business and you have a goal to pass on that business through generations and you want to see that business continue through your grandchildren and your great grandchildren and really provide the family with wealth and provide the family with this cohesion and the ability to work together and really keep the business and the family together for multiple generations. This is a conversation you want to tune into because there are statistics showing that family business longevity is shrinking. And if we don't fix the human condition within the family business, we don't have the ability to solve that concern. So we have Rob Ferguson of Ferguson Alliance joining us today for this fascinating conversation because he has done work with family businesses, keeping them in business and overcoming those human conflicts and challenges that prevent business from flourishing and thriving and lasting. So Rob, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation on the Money Advantage podcast today.
Thanks, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Bruce, I would love to just hear your thoughts as we jump into this topic of family business and lasting and creating this generational wealth.
I throughout my career, I'm always astounded that business owners think that the transition to the next generation is just going to happen naturally without it and without any intentionality to it. And it has ruined a lot of not only the wealth that they created because that particular business just rides off into the sunset without any value being exchanged to the next generation or even somebody else. And it's because I really believe is that they get caught up too much in the day-to-day operation and they don't do an intentional planning going forward. I've seen this over and over. Matter of fact, I've challenged many business owners that I've actually done business with over the years to actually not think of this as, because some of them will say, yeah, when I get closer to wanting to exit, then I will do this. And I say, what does that closer mean? And they'll say, well, I figure about a year before I want to exit, I'll do that. And I challenge them to actually have a 5 or even 10 year plan on this because the business climate changes. You also have to actually prepare the next generation. A lot of them the next generation do not believe they want to be in the business, but that's because they don't understand the business and the benefits that they actually have to actually keep the business running for themselves. And so I believe the viewpoint should be intentionality of the transfer of the asset years before it actually comes to fruition. So I'm excited to anybody that has the kind of experience and expertise as Rob does to share his knowledge to our listeners.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and give a little bit of background information for who Rob is and why you should listen in to this show today. Because when we have somebody with experience and the wisdom that comes from that experience, it's very valuable to listen. So I want to tell you a little bit about Rob. He's a seasoned CEO, so he's been a CEO in multiple capacities over many years. He's also a trusted advisor to family businesses since 2010. So prior to becoming an advisor, Rob had a career in leadership, including 10 years as a CEO at two different companies. One was a public company with 300 million in revenue. The other was a family business with 100 million in revenue. And in both cases, he successfully managed the restructuring and the sale of the company. Or maybe that was the second one. We'll let you tell that story,
That was the
Rob.
second one. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
All right. So Rob has led companies through 10x growth. He's helped turn struggling companies around, and he's conducted more than 100 million in acquisitions. Rob's company, Ferguson Alliance, is on a mission to increase the lifespan of family businesses. And he believes that with the right foundation in place, which we'll talk about today, businesses can live infinitely. We already appreciate the questions that you've been jumping in on YouTube specifically. And so please ask your questions about family business longevity. If there's anything that sparks your attention as you're listening today, please ask those questions and we will hope to address them and add that into the discussion. So Rob, can you share with us why you saw how you saw this trend for shrinking longevity in business and why you decided to do something about it.
Well, it came about maybe 15, 16 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. I was the CEO of the family business that you mentioned in your opening comments, the $100 million. It was an industrial packaging company. It was fifth generation, about 17 cousins involved in it. And the business was not healthy. It was moving close to the zone of insolvency. I was brought in as the first non-family executive to lead the business, and my mission that the board gave me was to fix it and sell it. I mean, that's what it was. The cousins no longer wanted to have it. They weren't that active in the business, and so that's what I did. While I was doing that, I was invited by a very large family office outside of Atlanta to be on their board of directors of a portfolio company. They had a small private equity business inside of their family office. They happened to be 100 years old. The fifth generation happened to be running it, over 70 family shareholders, and they were wildly successful. So I was
Wow.
involved in both companies at the exact same time. And I was fascinated by what I was learning, and so I'm naturally a very curious person. So you can imagine I'm asking questions to help fix the company that I was running. Okay, well, what happened? What's going wrong? What do we have to do different? What's your opinion? But then when I was sitting on the board of directors, I had an opportunity to really um, interview regularly the sitting patriarch. Well, how did this get set up, and why are you all so successful through 5 generations, which is very, very rare? I learned some of their best practices and some of their trials and tribulations and their persistence.
Hmm.
So from that generated more curiosity. So I started doing more research. And what I learned is that in the 1950s, the average lifespan of a business, now any business, family, non-family, they didn't separate the two at that time, was 60 years. That was the average lifespan.
Hmm.
In 2022, the average lifespan of a family business is 24 years.
Hmm.
And the S&P 500 is 15 years. So it's a dramatic change that we've seen, and that was a trend that I don't know. It just happened to be where I was in my career. I'd already kind of climbed the mountain, been a CEO twice, and I wanted to do something. I wanted to be something different, which was I wanted to be helpful to other family business owners. I never really thought much about family business. I was always kind of an institutional guy,
Hmm.
but I realized this was a big problem, and I wanted to be part of helping solve a big world problem. And this was it. Because family businesses in America, as we know, they generate, I think it was right after the pandemic, they generated 78% of all the new jobs were created
Hmm.
through family businesses. 60% of GDP comes from family business. Almost all of our philanthropy donations come from family businesses. And then if you think about all of the innovation that we've seen and experienced, again, they started off as family businesses, right? In a garage, computer.
Mm-hmm.
So the point being, I learned that this is very important, and I became very passionate about reversing this trend. And so that started me with Ferguson Alliance 14 years ago. I was a sole practitioner for many years. We now have 4 business advisors. Hopefully, today we're going to have a 5th one starting to help kind of um, increase awareness about this trend and to help family business owners and soon to be family business leaders navigate these waters. So that's really how we got here.
So
You
Rob,
know,
oh, I'm sorry, Rachel. Um, I
it's
was
okay.
just
Go ahead,
thinking,
Bruce.
I was just thinking that, with our monetary, I look at this more from the finance end of it and monetary policy that
Right.
could also be causing this problem, because years ago, when you're saying the businesses lasted for 60 years, a lot of those businesses were started without borrowing capital. They were started with the sound money principles of saving first, starting the business, growing the business, so on and so forth. And then we get the development of the SBA, and then cheap money lending, so on and so forth, so that people that really are looking for this short term, oh, I want to get in and get out kind of situation, or they don't really have the background from family support beforehand. They just going out to become like this new entrepreneur that anybody can get into and everything. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying I think monetary policy also plays into this easy money situation. And then as we have built up this balloon of money, you also can exit from these businesses by selling them now to private equity and so on and so forth. That also has a windfall for the family, where in the past they may have actually exited with a dividend being paid from the next generation to them instead of this one big pile of money. So
Yeah.
do you see that as being also part of that change going forward, or am I way off base on this?
No, you're not way off base. There's many factors of the change. I don't want to just say that we can come in and magically transform your company to live forever. I mean, there's external factors that are going on. And if you think about business, or when I think about business in the 1950s, first of all, we were regionalized economy, maybe even a localized economy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, today we're a global economy.
Mm-hmm.
I even remember in the 90s when I was commuting from Houston to California, to Southern California, my wife would like to go with me on some of those trips because there was different retail stores in Southern California that she couldn't find in Houston. But that's not true today, right? I mean, they've all consolidated. So there's a lot of things that we were very much an agriculture society back then, a lot
Mm-hmm.
more than we are today. We were very concentrated on family businesses because we were so localized and regionalized, right? I mean, your barbershop was not a national chain of 3,000 barbershops like it is today. So
Mm-hmm.
as an example, so a lot of factors. I don't think you're off base at all, Bruce. But the part that I believe gets overlooked and very rarely talked about, except if you engage with us, is the cultural element. And it's being able to get your family really oriented around a North Star.
Yeah.
What we're really all about. So when we start an engagement, we ask a very simple question that is very challenging for them to answer. And that question is two questions. Do you want to be a family first business, or do you want to be a business first family? You have to choose. There's no in between. You have to choose. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It is up to that family to choose. But then once the choice has been made, you have to pound the stake in the ground, and that becomes your center pole for all decisions going forward. Now then, we can tell you that business first families, longevity is much longer than family first. So again, we know a lot of family first businesses, and they're very successful. They can be everything from the local dry cleaners to maybe a mega regional retail store. It doesn't matter the size or what they're in. But the point being, if you're going to choose to be a family first business, what you're doing is putting the family's best interest ahead of the business. Okay, and in just very simplified terms. The company that I was running, that I was hired to help turn around and sell it, that's what they were. They were a family first business. Okay, with all these cousins that had all these company credit cards and company cars, and you know, Aunt Sally was in a role that was paying six figures, and she would only have to come to the office 3 or 4 times a month for a few hours. Okay, so that you're putting the best interest of the family first. Now that worked, and it worked for them until they couldn't sustain it. Right? They could not sustain that. There was too many folks requiring the income from that business. Whereas the family office I was working with as a board member, they were a business first family. They put the best interest of the business ahead of the family, realizing that the family in whole would benefit for multiple generations if they kept that business performing at a high level.
So, Rob, I have something really interesting that I want to differentiate with you here, because I think that what you're saying is the same thing as what we're saying in a different context or a different way of saying it. So I would say as well, from 1950 to now, you've seen a significant breakdown of family in terms of even what the definition of family is. I mean, back in the day, before the 1950s, it was grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, that was family. And then we went to nuclear family, which was mom, dad, and kids. Then we had fewer and fewer kids, and it's mom, dad, and one kid and a dog, or 5 dogs, because that's, compensating for the children. And then you have, well, it's a family if they live together. It's not even necessarily by marriage. And so you see all kinds of shifting in our culture away from what even a family is, and it's become smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I think the value of family as a whole in our culture has diminished. In addition, it was very interesting when I heard you say family first business or business first family, because my first inclination would be to say, well, if you don't have a strong family, you can't have a strong business. And so if you focus just on the business, there can be challenges where it's not in the best interest of the family, where the family is serving the business rather than the business serving the family. And if you're in a position where it's really not about the family, then you have all this fractioning in the relationships. But what was really interesting that I heard you say is that if you put the business ahead of the family, which would probably be a different language than we would use, but if you put the business ahead of the family, you can have a business that benefits the family for generations. And what I think the challenge is when people look at a business as a thing that they can reach into and take out of what serves them in terms of, I want a paycheck, I want that credit card you mentioned, I want the stock, I want to somehow have my title on a door somewhere, and it's about me and me as an individual, and I want to take from the business. Well, there's nothing then to have the business continue this mechanism of production if the family members are thinking of the business as something they're going to receive from, a consumption-based situation. Whereas if they instead would recognize, we're producers, we have this creative capacity, how do we see the unique ability of each individual to be able to find a way to benefit and serve the business? And if each family member saw themselves as a steward of a business and they were producing, not just consuming, then I don't know how you would define that. Would that be defined as family first or business first? But I think that would last longer and serve the family longer. Would you agree?
Well, there was a lot there that you just said.
Sure.
And let me just start from where you started with how you first reacted to the question and how that relates to the family values or the breakdown of family. Most of our clients, when we first ask that question, they react that may be similar to you, but they typically react that it's a value-centered question. Okay. Oh, my values. We'll get a lot of families that say, oh, no, my values are God, family, business. Okay. They'll have some sort of hierarchy of what they consider is their value, what they value the most. And we try to turn that and say, well, don't think about it as value centered. We're going to talk about your family values in a moment. Let's separate those. Now let's think about it as best interests. Let's think about it senior priority versus subordinate priority. Okay, so we walk them through this. I had one family down in Florida. It took them almost 3 months to answer this question. And then there was a lot of family members, and it was a struggle for them. It really was, because then we run through scenarios once they make a choice, right? So the families have gotten smaller, the family dynamics have changed, but I truly believe we work with a lot of different types of families, blended families, and um, sometimes we work with partners that are not family, but they're just partners, and we kind of lump that in because they still are influenced with their two different families that are coming in, and it can bleed into this business succession. So that's the first distinction, how we approach. The second distinction, which I think is what I definitely agree with, is the the glue to everything. The underpinning is the core values of the family are incorporated into the business values. So
Mm-hmm.
what are the real key beliefs that the sitting generation has about work ethic, about social responsibilities, about employees, whatever that is, right? And having that woven in to the ethos of the business, we have found is the real cement or foundation of being able to have these businesses reach what we call the zone of prosperity and sustain it because those values are there. Now, it's maybe not going to be 100% of the family values, particularly when as we move with third, fourth, fifth generations, these are big families and they have differing values. But what we did is we look for what are the three common values that you all share? And let's make sure those are woven and incorporated into the corporate values. And that becomes the foundation of their long succession. So I do agree with that as well.
Rob, I love how you're talking about the values and values of the family needing to be something that are underpinning the
Yeah.
values of a business. Would you share if somebody was starting as maybe they are that first generation family right now and first generation business, and they would like to see this business continue, what are some of those best practices that can allow them to create a business and communicate in a way that is healthy within the family and within the business so that it can last?
Well, the secret, as Bruce mentioned very early on, it's if you haven't already started, you're already late. You must start now. It's waiting 1 year, 2 years before your event, you will not be nearly as successful personally exiting, but definitely transitioning to the next generation. So to answer your question, we have several succession planning events going on. I think of one client that I'm actually involved with. He came to me. He built this business from zero to a very nice business enterprise over 25 years. He's still young and still wants to work. You know, he's in his, I think, early 50s, late 40s. So but he has a son who is in the Marine Corps, and so he's not even in the business yet. But he said, "Look, I want to start planning for my succession." So, he's got a 10-year view of what that looks like. And the longer the time you have, the one thing I wanted to add on, I definitely agreed with everything you said, Bruce, about the timing of planning. But I would add that the longer your roadmap is, the more options you have. The narrower you make that roadmap, the shorter the time, you have fewer, if maybe not even any options. If you're just planning a year out, you've eliminated your options. Whereas 10 years, so we build a succession plan that has some branches on it. And we identify what we call trigger events. Well, if this happens, if this kind of event happens, this is the way we go. If this event happens, this is the way we go. Now, these succession plans, our best practice is you review them every couple of years, not every year, but every couple of years, or whenever there's been a significant event in the family, a death, a divorce, or in the business, an acquisition, change in leadership, whatever. But you review that and you're updating. So I would have to say, start now, start now, start now, and you'll have a lot more options with your succession.
So Fritz from one of our listeners is asking, what would you say are the pillars of a sustainable business? So could you comment on just maybe the ones that you've seen? I have some ideas, but we actually have you on for your expertise today. So what are some of the pillars that you think that that businesses establish so that they can sustain from one generation to the next?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really it helps me be able to articulate our process of how we work with family businesses on building what we call their prosperity. And the three pillars that we have is, there's a shared vision, that North Star that we talked about, organizational strength. In other words, you've got, world-class leadership, you have a talent management plan that you invest into, and you have an organizational culture that's has high accountability, which brings high level of trust. So that's that organizational strength, and then there's rigor and process. We call that our system for managing. Like whether it's getting into your strategic disciplines, your annual planning process, and your overall company governance. So those are our three pillars: shared vision, organizational strength, system for managing. Those pillars sit on top of what we just talked about, which are the family values and the business culture. And that is what we believe will lead to sustainable legacy, growth of your business, and create overall value and let you recreate your value proposition as the business is moving through its what I believe is a very predictable life cycle.
So we have another comment, a person that's actually challenging the topic today, and I'd like to see how you would answer this. But she says, "Why would you lock your grandchildren into your dreams?
Oh,
Why would you?
yes,
Yeah, why?" She says, "Why not let them have freedom of choice?" And I would argue they do have freedom of choice.
right,
That's why the businesses do not sustain. But
yeah,
but I think there's a tremendous difference between saying you're going to be in the business and you got to keep, or even guilting them into continuing the business, which frankly it's not going to work because they're not going to be passionate enough. But I thought it was an interesting question, and my answer to that, and I'm curious how yours is. My answer to that is the more knowledge that the next generation, it doesn't even have to be the children, grandchildren. It could be a cousin, an uncle, a brother. I mean, there's all kinds of succession for a family business. But if they know the pros and cons of it, then they're more likely, and they understand the transition period, they're more likely to say, hey, this is really good for me because I don't have to start anything from scratch and I have a nice income stream. So, but I'm curious how you would respond to that.
yeah. It's a great question, and a lot of times we're the ones who have to bring that up with our family clients because they do believe it's like an arranged marriage. Okay, well, these are the cousins that are going to fall into the positions, and they're only 3 years old. Well, yeah, that's not going to work that way. So I definitely agree. So that's the reason why we asked the question: are you a family first business or a business first family? And part of that is well, you want to make sure that you've got the right people sitting in the right seat. You want the best people sitting in the right seat. So let me just for the listener that asked you that question, if you go to our website, um, Ferguson-Alliance.com, you go into, I think it's the media section where we have videos, and there's also a blog on this. Brandy Merrick is one of our advisors, and she wrote a wonderful story a couple of years ago about, I may not get the title exactly right, but how do you leave the family you love? How do you leave the business of the family you love? So she actually became an advisor of ours but she left the family business, and it's a fascinating kind of testimonial of her journey. So let's go back to that example I was just talking about. Remember the young man who's in the Marine Corps, and well, who knows? He may not want to do this, um, but it's about choice, as you said, Bruce. And so his dad is bringing him along and sharing with him what it's about and giving him an opportunity to learn the business. But all along the way, it's fully his choice. In fact, that's one of the core definitions that his father said in his succession plan. Well, I want it to be my son's choice that he comes in, and I also want the employees to feel that this was natural, that it made sense that he came in. So we really, in our succession planning process, we definitely delve into that, because that's so important that that the member, the successor, has choice. Now, one other thing, this conversation that we're having about succession, it always gets messy because there's three conversations going on at the same time. And so I think what's important for any advisor is to separate, unwind, unbraid those three conversations. So the three conversations that we're having right now, we haven't gotten too far into it, but how do we transition the wealth in the family? How do we transition the ownership of the business, which, by the way, for our clients, almost 90% of their net worth, on average, over the last 14 years, almost 90% of the average family's net worth was in the business. Okay, so how do we transition the wealth? And then thirdly, how do we transition the leadership? So those are three different conversations. And what we do is we separate those three conversations independently, come up with some direction. Then we bring the three together and wind them back and find out where it fits and where it doesn't. And so it's an iterative process back and forth until we can then rebraid everything back together and we have a unified succession. So to your listeners who said, oh, why would you want to just tell your grandchild they have to run the business? You don't. But that grandchild, because they were born into the family, may actually be a beneficiary of the family business. And that's not a bad thing. That can be a really good thing, but it has to be by design. And that person, that grandchild, to your point, Bruce, needs to learn, well, what does it mean to be a beneficiary? And there's a lot of organizations out there that do beneficiary boot camps to help teach up and coming beneficiaries. Okay, well, what does it mean to me? I may not be in the business. I may not be leading the business. I may not have voting shares in the business, but I'm getting some distribution checks from the business. Now, not every family decides to do that. I mean, these are all personal decisions, but a lot of them will. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, that was really good. And what about the follow up to this was, how do you work to mitigate against internal family conflict in relationship to the transition of the business? Because I've seen this before, where maybe I know it's cliche, but the oldest son wants to be in the business, but doesn't have the skill set to actually be the CEO, or the oldest daughter doesn't have the skill set to be the CEO, and maybe the third one does. But then, there's resentment, so on and so forth. And do you have any kind of psychological people that can, psychiatrists or psychologists that actually help them through this part of the conflict?
We do have some, whether they're either behavioral scientists, we also have behavioral psychologists, but not to help in this. What we believe will help in this is going back to my first two questions. You have to decide, are you a business first family or a family first business? I mentioned to you the family that we had down in Florida. It took 3 months for them to answer that question. And the reason why is there was two brother-in-laws that were in the business. The patriarch, the father-in-law, unexpectedly died. You're going to love this story. The father-in-law had a terminally, I think it was a massive heart attack. He's in ICU. He calls the two boys in, and they had no ownership. They've been working in business. He told the two boys, and this is a true story. He said, boys, I'm going to give each of you 50% of the business. And they said, oh, thank you, Dad. I really appreciate it. Nope, it's done. You'll be bankrupt before the year's end. And then he died. That was his succession plan. That was it. So now this family is very close, very, very close together. And nice sized family, very successful business, very successful business. And the two brothers, guess what they did? They made a pact. They said, we will always do what's best for the family, and we will make every decision consensually. And they shook hands. We are going to be co-leaders. They called me almost 3 years later. They were in big trouble. And so the reason I asked them that first question, this was going back maybe 12 years ago. I asked them that question. And so the idea is, well, who's going to be the leader? We know that we can't be 100% consensual on every single business decision, particularly when you get higher up in the leadership. There's no right or wrong decisions. Those decisions are definitely gray and ambiguous, right? Mm. You never know. The further down in the organization you get, it's pretty clear. Yeah, did Jane show up on time or not? Yes or no? So the point being, they had to go through that to get to, and they finally did. And certainly one of the brother-in-laws did become the CEO. And it was because, back to your question, he was the best qualified. The other brother wasn't qualified, and he knew it. He knew he wasn't qualified. Not only that, he didn't want to do it. That wasn't what he wanted to do, but he felt like he had to do it because it was actually his father's business. He felt like over the years, his father, it was a Dutch family, so he had a lot of the values of good, hardworking Dutch family. There's a lot of greatness in those values, but he felt like he had to step into those shoes. And by answering that question with his sister and brother-in-law, he finally had permission to step out of that expectation, whether it was self-imposed or his father put it onto him. I have no idea, but he was able to give himself permission to say, I don't have to be the CEO. I don't want to be the CEO. You're the best person for that. And so now we can move forward. But that took 3 months to get there. So did we bring in a psychiatrist or a psychologist or behavior? We did not. What we did do is we just helped the family discover what they truly were up to and help them get aligned. That's all we did. I came out of business as a CEO. So, I was a lot more directive in them, right? When you're operating the business, you have to make tough calls and a lot of times you delegate, but in this role, we are nothing more than just guides, I guess. And yes, we have some tools. Yeah, yes, we have some questions, but we and you're probably picking up, we use a Socratic approach. And it's more important to us that the family discovers on their own what their North Star is, not to hire somebody to come in and say, well, this is what you should do. These are the 9 best practices. These are the 3 watchouts. Could I write an article on that? I can, and we do, but that's not how we work with our clients. We let the clients discover. And because it is better to teach a man to fish than to give him fish.
Rob, it's fascinating that you're talking about helping the family discover who they really are and giving them permission to do what they're really designed to do and what they desire to do, not having those limits and obligations imposed by someone else, which actually goes back to the very first question as well that we had at the front of the conversation, which was, do you essentially lock your grandchildren into your dream, or why not give them the freedom of choice? And what I think is really interesting, if we kind of come back to that idea again, if you are a founder and you are thinking multi-generationally, you probably are thinking about how can you provide a benefit to the family and how can you create something that lasts. Not necessarily are you saying, I want to lock every single person in, but if you are presenting the opportunity and you're presenting the path to ownership and to succession and to leadership inside of the business and the company, maybe you're going to train your children differently, or maybe you're going to provide them opportunities that they could step in should they desire to. And I think that freedom probably allows that flourishing and the ability for somebody to say, yeah, I really like the way this business is going, and it feels like something I want to contribute to, and it feels like something I want to continue on. But I would bet that that is the business that is focused on business first, family that you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. There's when the choice is business first family, you're going to go down a different path. It's going to be a longer path. It's perhaps even a harder path to walk at times. But the dividends, the future dividends on that, the payback is so great. And I'm not talking about financial dividends. We get our families to define prosperity. What does that really mean to you? And it can't just be the dollar bill. And there's a lot of struggle that goes on to that to define, well, what does prosperity look like 100 years from now, 50 years from now? American families don't think that way.
It's so true.
But you go to Asia and they think that way.
Yes.
But we don't think that way. And most businesses, particularly, there's a reason why S&P 500 companies have 15-year lifespan today versus 24 in family. There's several, but I believe one of those reasons is because family businesses inherently have a longer-term view. It's easier for me to talk to a family business about a 10-year vision than it is for me to go in and talk to a private equity or VC-backed company of a 10-year vision. You know what their vision is? Next quarter.
90 days. I was going to say 90 days.
Next
yeah, 90
quarter.
days.
I gotta hit my quarter budget. And that's the big difference. But then just take that up a little higher. Well, you culturally, if you go to Asia, particularly Japan, I don't want to single out any one country, but there are other cultures that have a much longer term view of not only their family, but also their business. They're thinking in segments of centuries, not decades.
I want to share an idea real quick. So I wrote a book called 7 Generations Legacy, and this is to your point about the extended length of vision allows you to make better decisions, but then also the reason to think long term. So the idea of 7 generations actually came from the ancient Iroquois, who had their tribal councils that they would begin by saying, how can we make sure that the decisions we make today are going to positively impact 7 generations in the future, which none of us will live to see. 7 generations. That's like 200 years. I mean, nobody has that lifespan right now. And what's interesting is I've heard people, multiple people who have traveled to the Middle East, to your point about other places in the world having a longer term view. They don't need to be taught or told to think long term. They just do. They already are. They already identify themselves as, I'm the great great grandson of this person, and this is our family business and our family land, and this is what my family has handed down to me. Specifically, somebody from Dubai, their wealth there is passed generationally. They're already thinking generationally. And I think when we step into that ability to think generationally, it provides a lot of options. So, Rob, we're getting really close to our time today, and I really appreciate all of the engagement as well on our questions here. Let's go ahead and end on this one. Fritz is asking another question. So if the father had approached you with the idea of a 50-50 transition, how would you have responded to him? This is back to your story, Rob, that you shared earlier.
Mm-hmm. So ask your question, Rachel.
So the question is, if the father was on his deathbed, but he had spoken to you before and said, hey, this is how I'm going to have this meeting, and I'm going to appoint both of these 50-50, how would you have responded to him?
Well, hopefully I would have been able to have been introduced to him much sooner than his event. But one of the things we would have identified, again, is the answer to that question. I would have taken them through. And we would have made that decision well in advance. And there would have been an emergency contingency plan already put in place as well to handle a life event like this. Yeah. It really set the company backwards. And if he had done his work, a lot of first generations of that age group, they really resist succession planning. Mm-hmm. And even if they're second or third generation, they're just saying, well, my father or my grandfather never did it. Your point earlier at the very beginning, Bruce said, well, no, here it is. Here's the keys. Good luck, Frank Buck. That's it. but over time, they see the value and they understand it. And then I challenge them. I said, I want you to think about your unborn grandchildren and how is this going to play out? And at first, that's my son's job. No, it's
Mm.
your job. You've got to set them up for success. The earlier you start, the better off you're going to be. So, like the guy that has got a 10-year plan, his son's already, who knows if his son's going to come in or not, but he's prepared. He's prepared and he's doing it right.
That's excellent. I want to ask you one more question before we close here. How often are you talking in the room with more than one generation? I'm assuming I know the answer to this question, but how often are you?
I don't know, regularly, probably weekly, for sure. I think,
I have some technical difficulties.
yeah.
So what we're finding is in the same way, people that either have already transitioned out from business, or whether they have gotten their fortune other ways, is that conversation from one generation to the next and hearing it straight from the person is very valuable. But also to actually have a family constitution, family mission statement, so on and so forth, is also very good
Right.
process to have for people. So,
and that's where, that's a whole nother topic. Certainly that's where we go down and just think about this. There's a reason why 70% of family businesses today do not make it through the second generation. There's a reason for that. And that reason is quite simply poor planning and not taking ownership. The patriarch, the founding, the sitting leader, whatever generation you are, not doing their job.
thanks for the conversation today. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you and get a hold of you if they would like to use your services?
Well, certainly go to our website. You can contact any of our advisors. And again, that's Ferguson-Alliance.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Rob Ferguson. You can also go to our company webpage, Ferguson Alliance on LinkedIn. You can email me directly at rob@ferguson-alliance.com. Those are some of the simplest ways to get in touch with us.
Well, thanks again. I think this is very valuable for our listeners. We're always talking about legacy planning. We're also talking about money mindset, which I think is a big part of this, is whether you're going to let the money control you or you're going to control the money, which I think is very similar to family first or business first planning. And so thank you for being here today. For our listeners, continue to comment on this particular episode. If you have any more questions, we'll get to them. If we can't answer them personally, we'll reach out to Rob and we'll get his expertise. And for now, remember that success leaves clues. So let's model the successful few and not the crowd, and live a life in business that you love. Till next time, thanks for listening. All right, Rob. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time.